And Gordon is right. And anybody that's ever involved with any racing of any kind knows how tough it is to get a race on any streets, no matter where you are, whether it's Burnaby or Vancouver. We still remember years ago we tried to get a road race in Stanley Park, which would have been a wonderful thing. And all the tree huggers that came out told us that we would damage the trees, but they forgot to tell Mother Nature to have to blow them all down a few years later. And that's why this thing from Burnaby was so unique in the fact that everybody was willing to put it on, except for the fact that they forgot to tell the traffic people not to let the cars run down the streets at the same time. So from what I understand, and I wasn't there, but from what I understand, every now and again, like a postman or something would come driving down the road and they'd have to sort of get out of the way. Now, this race, as you'll see on there, there's some disagreement on where it may have gone, but the pits were in Central Park on Imperial. And this is what we gathered. Now, all we can't figure out, did they go north and then south from there? Or did it go the other way around and end up back there? But I'll let you guys work that one out for yourselves. Now, we have one person here today who was actually in that race. And there was an unfortunate incident, which I don't know if he wants to talk about it or not, but he created a lot of dust and a lot of people were quite worried about him. And the corner person that was there, the flag girl at the time, is also here. And Pat is sitting in the back. And there she is, raising her hand up. She was the flag girl on the corner. And Ted over here was the rider. And it was actually quite an interesting, you only did it once?
I'm one of the riders.
Oh, is there? Well, who else is here?
I don't think he's here. Carl Tashnik?
No, Carl didn't make it. There are, believe it or not, a couple of guys still left who are actually racing in that race. And of course, because of superior machines and a great sponsor, Trev Dealey wins it. All the people that know what I'm talking about, Trev Dealey, he won lots. He was quite talented, but his dad used to supply him with some of the nicest machines you've ever seen. And I was lucky at the time that Dayton McKenzie, who was sponsored by Trev, and when Trev wasn't looking, Dayton would let me ride those bikes, which I thought was just the greatest thing in the world. And at the time, people don't realize, but they're always looking at the guys who win these races. But some of the most important people that are on that track are the back markers. Those are the people that are out there so that the really fast guys can look good passing them. And I used to consider it a very good day if I could stay on the same lap with Dayton McKenzie. And he considered it a very funny day if he made sure I didn't. Now, my mom told me that I was going to eat a pound of dirt before I die. I didn't realize that it would all come off the back wheel of Dayton's bikes. And I ate lots of it, believe me. But motorcycle racing, I got into it late. I was racing cars when this race was going on. In 52, I was drag racing cars on Abbotsford Airport. And then I found out you could race motorcycles, so I ended up going out and buying one. And I actually, in 1957 was when I first met Dayton. Interesting situation. I buy a brand new motorcycle out of British Motorcycles, and I'm out putting the mileage on it, and two guys, I'm out by Alouette Lake, two guys come charging out of the bushes and up out of the ditch, across and down the other side, and disappear. I thought, that's kind of interesting. So I'm driving along. Now look, all of a sudden they're chasing me down the road. I thought, oh boy, here we go. All these biker guys, you know what they're like. I'd seen the wild ones, so I knew they were all tough guys. And they pulled me over and they said, is that the motorcycle from British Motorcycles? They knew the bike. And I said, yeah. He said, well, you should be riding it down here in the bush. And I looked at their bikes, and they were just covered in mud. And I said, I'm a hot rod guy with clean cars and clean upholstery. I said, that's not going in the bush. He said, well, come on, look at your tires. You should be out here with us. And so they talked me into going. And shortly after that, I joined the Royal City Rockets, in which I think probably, if I look around today, we've probably got at least a half a dozen people from here who are life members of the Royal City Rockets. And they were one of the two big clubs that were around at the time in the AMA section and things. But you guys are late. Speak of the devil and who walks in. Yeah. But at motorcycle racing, at the idea of racing on the streets, I mean, they were doing it in Europe all the time, but we weren't quite that well advanced. And what you're going to see is just a short segment of what we had. And luckily, the Royal City Rockets, when they started, bought a movie camera, and they ended up with many rolls of film, which we had a dinner for Dayton for Trev Dealey, and which Dayton was at. We took all that film and converted it to VHS, and then it's been since converted by Rocky Weinstein over here, whose dad did it all, and we ended up with DVDs, and those floated around. I think just about everybody I know has a copy of it, but it shows the old days. You could sit there, and if you have enough time in an evening, you can actually sit and watch us grow old. Matter of fact, you wait long enough, and I keep on talking, you can watch me grow old again. So, are you ready to go? Let's get on with this. I know it didn't seem like very long, but probably for those riders, it seemed like all day. And it's the best thing in the world when you think about it. You notice at the bottom of that thing, it says modern motorcycling in Murray and Evil. Well, Murray is here, and he's an archivist for motorcycling in this neighborhood. If he doesn't have it, it isn't available. And stand up, let the people see who you are. No, you're not that old. And it's great that because of the fact that when history happens, there's a tendency for people to forget it. And I was lucky enough to acquire a job at Trev Dealey's as the historian for Harley Davidson Canada. And I also put together a lot of things of my own at home. And I've got tons of archive stuff. But having said that, having one guy here who actually did ride at that thing, he's sitting over here, is Ted Havens, who has a birthday today. I would hazard a guess, and I wouldn't even do it because he'd never speak to me again. But today's his birthday, and they always. My dad told me there's two things in this world: there are old bikers and there's bold bikers. There's not any old, bold bikers. So that meant you were pretty careful when you were riding. Now, does anybody have any questions on what they saw? Oh, you're all quite happy with that? What else we got over there? Number 22 was Trev Dealey. But for some reason, yeah. Is that you, Ted? Yep, there's Ted. And this trophy is actually bouncing around. We haven't been able to track the actual trophy down. We think it's on Vancouver Island.
That's where we got the pictures from.
Yep. But that's the trophy that they had. And Ted was the last one to win it. And he was riding a matchless. And most people, oh, Ted, yes.
Was there a comment, the one that's on the left of that plaque is Dave Wildman?
Yep. Who's in the back. You turn around and take a look at this. And again, Pat, his wife, was the corner girl at that race that time. So, and a lot of us are still doing this.
No, she was living dangerously standing there.
I'd say it would be dangerous standing around anywhere when there's bikes out there. Unfortunately, or fortunately, Carl Porter or Carl Potashnik at that time is a little under the weather and couldn't make it out. But it's to know that it's guys who are our history are still around. And speaking of history, I'm looking over the crowd here, and I see a couple of guys from the Lower Mainland Motorsport Pioneer Society, and we have a lot of them here. How many historians are there here from that Pioneers? Like, there's two right here. You guys, let's get everybody to stand up so we can see who's still left. Ron Lacey, here, there. Murray, the two Mackenzies, and their dad, Dayton. So it's a family tradition, and it goes around. And there's Dave Wildman is another one. George Hollinger, and there's another. And these are the guys that are still around. And Ted Havens again. These guys are still around, and they're still enjoying the sport. And people used to look down their noses at motorcycling, and hot rodding for that matter. But I can remember a time when I could take a girl out on a date on my bike, and the mom and dad would never let her get in my car. And then they showed that movie, The Wild One. Things changed. Now she could go on my car, but she couldn't go on my bike. But it's been a sport that's been very good to all of us. At the front here, Dave Linton. I went to school with Dave. We're all kids from North Burnaby. We all joined the Royal City Rockets. And he was the Canadian junior motocross champion. Yeah. Well, you can speak up. Just wave your hand so people can see that you're still here. Yeah, he's still with us. But yeah, it's a kind of a sport where once you're involved with it, the stories are just. We don't have enough time tonight to tell a lot of the stories, and maybe it's just as well, because some of them are a little embarrassing. But like I said, did anybody have any questions about what's being on the screen here? When we had indoor races at Cloverdale, the ambulance was a 55 Ford station wagon with no heater, and it was my daily transportation. We couldn't afford an ambulance, so we used the station wagon. Safety vehicles? We were lucky we had Band-Aids.
Terry, do you want to speak to some of these pictures from the
Well,
Rockets and others?
I could. Now this here for all you Rocket members. This is the building of the clubhouse, which was at the foot of Edinburgh Street in New Westminster.
It was actually not in New Westminster, it was in unorganized territory adjacent to New Westminster.
So we had no fixed address even in those days. But actually, it was right by the train tracks, which are now part of the SkyTrain station. And when we started rides out of there, we would go on the track and then ride along and follow it, and then the ride would start from that point. And it was actually quite an interesting situation. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was an old Sun paper shack that they moved out of that property.
That's at Chick Freeberg's place, Friedag's place in Sapperton.
Yep.
That's probably the first picture of the club having an event, and they're playing poker, and there's a couple of girls there,
No.
and there were 3 Bonnies in the club, and they're hard to sort them out.
Now, Chick Friedag was injured or killed he worked for Horn Payne Electrical.
That's right.
And he got electrocuted and he died. And they had a run called the Chick Friedag Run, and I think the trophies are still at the GVMC clubhouse right now. And this here was a Halloween party. I haven't had time to really go over it, but an old friend of mine who is no longer with us is Gim Wong, a Chinese gentleman who was into racing on everything, is in that picture somewhere. I don't know what he was dressed up as, but
So were there any girls that raced as well at that time?
Gir-
Any girls raced at that time, or was it just all the boys?
oh heavens no. Actually, my first wife was one of the first lady motorcycle riders around at the time. And Trev was so taken by that, he actually gave her and maintained a bike for her all the time she was riding. But it was unusual. And one of the Royal City Rockets, one of the girls was a member, probably the best rider we had for the longest time, went to be a Vancouver City Police, and they wouldn't let her go on the motorcycle squad. So they were left out of everything. Oh, there's Rocky's dad and mom.
That's not my dad, that's Ben Drinka.
That's your mom, isn't it?
That's my mom.
Yeah.
That's Ben Drinka on his aerial square 4.
Oh, so 4 aerial square 4s. Not my favorite bike.
Bert Allen?
That's a name that escapes me. And when the clubhouse was torn down, I had hundreds of pictures that were on the wall, and they all disappeared. And nobody seems to know where they went. They're probably sitting in an old moldy basement someplace. But again, there were people there whose names I remember, but a lot I didn't know.
That funeral was Christmas Eve, 1940.
I was only 3. And Jimmy Saint, I do remember the name on a 39 Gold Star. And you'll notice that every club that was going at the time had its own uniform. And you'll see the Rockets all had these nice jerseys that they wore. And I had a jacket, but if you were riding on the street, you weren't allowed to ride with your crest on. A little opposite to what it is today. But now this is CMA guys, and if you look in the back corner, 2 over from the white sweatshirt is Dave Wildman, who's sitting in the back here. Yeah. And the guy on this side is Pete Kellon, who again is no longer with us. But these are all guys who would go on to racing at Daytona Beach and places like that and do well. Does anybody remember Digney Speedway? Besides George and Dayton? Dayton used to race at Digney, and he raced. Believe it or not, he raced. I got to stop and think. It was a Hudson that he had. Now I've got pictures at home of him in that Hudson, but it's too expensive to maintain a bike and a car, so the car had to go. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I did the same thing.
So where was Digny, Speedway?
Where was Digney? You know where McPherson School is?
Yeah.
Right there.
And Imperial. Right?
It wasn't that long. But actually at Digney Speedway, so where you could recognize, if you see pictures, if you see a sawmill in the background, it had a sawmill, and if you sat in the grandstands, if they were cutting wood, sometimes they would drown out the sounds of the cars out there.
That's the end of the line.
That's the end of the line. My goodness. Well, any questions? You've got lots of people to ask questions of. No?
Was there any bad accidents or anything with your group, or did everybody manage to ride safely?
No, we made, I think we made a glorious error. They had a sort of a ruling to keep the membership down. Somebody had to retire from the one section to bring a new person in. And we didn't get enough people to come in and fill out the club. And so we just expired. No bad accidents. Although a few guys did meet their demise on bikes. But a lot of the guys at the time are gone now. But Dave is a life member. I'm a life member. Rocky's a life member. Dayton's a life member. And like we're still using our bikes, but it's getting less and less all the time. The city of Vancouver and the city of Burnaby are not good motorcycle riding places. How many people here have walked on Burnaby Mountain, on the trails? How many people have ridden their motorcycle on those trails? Those motorcycle trails and the walking trails were actually put together by motorcycle clubs. And once a year, they'd have a work party, and everybody would go up there, including Dayton McKenzie, Trev Dealey, all the people, the real fast racers. Everybody got a pick and a shovel and a hacksaw or whatever, and we cut down branches to make the thing more viable. And then the horse people started using it, and they found out they liked it, so they went to the municipality and got us kicked off. And then the bicycle people found out that the horse people had it. They went to the municipality and got the horses kicked off. And then the walking people have got up there. I don't see any bicycles anymore. So is there anything left? Maybe we can get the walkers kicked off of there too. But that's just the way civilization works. And not very civilized, but that's what happens. But a lot of the guys that I know, including Dave and Donnie Charlton, Bruce Sebring, the Miranders, we all learned to ride on Burnaby Mountain. And it was quite a challenge, really, because in those days we were all riding bikes that were far too big, far too heavy for us. And they didn't have the nice little 125 and 252 strokes that you could go out on. The first bike I had weighed nearly 700 pounds, and I weighed 120. But I was lucky that Trev felt sorry for me and bought me a pair of leathers, which if I had brought them tonight, you probably could have seen some of the rubber left on the left-hand leg off the front wheel of Dayton's bikes, because that's what he'd love to do, was sneak up behind you and buzz the back of your leg with his front tire until the time his foot got caught. But that's another story. Like I said, there's lots of stories that we sit and we kind of chuckle about them now, but they're a little embarrassing at the time. And luckily, I have saved the Mackenzie family leathers. I got them hanging in my garage at home. They almost made it out into the garbage, but I saved them. So when you guys ever decide to go riding again, I got a set of leathers for you. Might be a little tight. So again, questions. You can see it.
I got three. Was that race only run for 1 year?
Pardon?
The second question is, how many guys were riding in it and what machines were they riding?
Well, that's the kind of a question that you should be directing at Ted, because you remember, I wasn't there. How many people, Ted?
How many riders would you say?
I would, it must have been about a dozen of us there.
And do you remember some of the kinds of bikes, the types of bikes?
Well, there's obviously the BSA and what was available most times. Triumph BSA, I had a Velocet, which was a girder fork rigid, and there was old bikes like that there too.
Any
But I
Harleys
mean,
or anything?
it's old now, but in those days it wasn't. It was only 2-3 years old.
Trev Dealey was riding a 500cc speed twin BSA. I do know that.
That was probably the most modern piece that was there.
Yeah. Until he wanted a Harley, and then he went and saw his dad. Yes, Gary, you had another question.
I remember his Harleys at Abbotsford.
Yeah, that's right. You're riding the WR, yeah, which we still have down at at Dealey's. I worked in the museum at Dealey's for 5 years, and we amassed a lot of Trev's stuff down there. And now that bike sits. There's one whole room is all Trev Dealey stuff, and the WR is a centerpiece. Gary, you had another question.
Yeah, did the Rockets go on any long rides together? And if they did, what was the most interesting, in quotes, ride?
Well, we didn't go on rides like people do today, where they all get in 2-on-2 down the highway and stop at a little town and have a refreshment, go to the next little town and have another refreshment. We didn't do that. We had our refreshments while we were riding. But I learned a good lesson. And I don't remember if it was Dayton that showed me or somebody else. But we used to ride alongside Still Creek, and there's a lot of runoffs, and they'd have planks over them. The first guy to the planks would turn them over and put the frosty side up and then carry on. The next rider's coming along into the ditch. And that was one trick that used to be played, and Dayton did teach me a good one. We found out what we used to do was we would do a ride. They would drop little bags of flour that would designate this is the turn, and you'd go up the trail. Well, Dayton and I found the flour bag on the ground, scuffed the flour all out, went back, did a couple of burnouts up another trail, and then went back and very carefully went up the trail we were supposed to be on, and everybody else went the wrong way. And I still didn't win.
Now, these bikes, were they standard stock or were they modified to any degree? Like,
I think you took off as much stuff as you dared, like center stands and things like that were just,
I mean, motor-wise, performance-wise, did you do much in the motors or just leave them stock?
oh, you did everything you possibly could, because there was no tech inspection. I remember one guy, and he still argues today, riding in a 250 class on a 305 Honda Superhawk, and he kept telling me it was a 250. And I said, I don't think so, but he stuck by it. He still admits today it was a 250. But little things like that. But yeah, modifying, it's whatever you could afford. And Trev Dealey, he built a wonderful bike in 1957. It was a BSA 650 twin, and they made a short rod out of it. And the RPMs are terribly high on it. It almost hurt your ears to listen to it. But the thing is that the guy riding it weighed a little more than I did, and I could beat him off the line on my BSA, but when we got to the corner, his technique took over very, very well, and mine didn't. But I'd pick the bike up and catch up to him again, because I had a 58 BSA, and the 57 short rod, it was just fast bike, unbelievable, in a good set of hands. And to this day, we don't know where our bikes went. We never kept track of that stuff. I think one mine went to Dave, but who knows where it went from there. Well, Dave ended up with my 58, but
You must have upgraded from 250 to something else, did you? Or
I started off with a 500. But the thing was that Trev was quite generous. And when we were finished, there was a rule. If he gave you a new bike to use, you took all the good sheet metal off and put all the old stuff back on with the dents and everything in it. And when you're bringing it back down for a trade-in, you put all the new stuff back on. Driven by a little old lady in Burnaby. Yes, George.
Going back to the road race, was the sound added for effect? Because it just didn't sound right to me.
I'm afraid I'll have to lead over to my friend here.
The sound comes from the film, but I showed the video at 3/4 speed so that you could get a bit better glimpse of Ted there going into the dust. And I think when that happened, that the sound didn't sync up anymore with the video clips, and it also seems to be at a much deeper pitch too. There were some pretty throaty bikes out there, so it came from slowing the video down.
I got the impression it didn't sound in sync, but I was just curious.
Yep.
There were a few sounds in there that sounded like two strokes to me.
It's taken from a TT out.
Yeah.
That was an MV, Mark?
Sir?
That was an MV?
Yeah, yeah, something like that. Those old TT albums
Yes.
is what it was. Yeah. So, who had the recording equipment in 1952? It's amazing somebody had a camera.
Red Robinson hadn't even got on the radio yet. No, any more questions? Yes.
How do the newer motorcycles compare performance-wise to the older ones?
Oh, they're not anywhere close to going as fast as we used to. I'll let you make the judgment on that. You can buy a Harley Davidson, and it's got 114 cubic inches, and they give you a warranty, because there never used to be warranties. But you think the ones today are better than the old ones? I think so. But, you know, the thing is, at the time, what we had was the fastest that was available. And all you had to do was, I asked the guy that owned one. And whichever bike that you owned, that was the best bike of the year. Until you bought next year's model, and then you got something else. Dayton.
I took that DSA Spitfire and drags down to Arlington. Turned, with the same gearing we raced on the dirt with, I turned 115 miles an hour with it. And the two rail jumps blew up, so I got top eliminator. And all I changed was the tires.
Dayton and I went to Bayview, Washington drag strip. He got top eliminator on his BSA, and I got a little eliminator on mine. But, you know, that was another thing. When you had a bike, you used it for everything. You had one bike. So English trials, there's Terry out on his 650 PSA. He's trying to ride English trials. You wanted to go trail riding, yanking those bloody things over the top of logs and stuff. But it was the only bike you had. And you went to work on it the next day. And a lot of times, the police were pretty reasonable. Lots of times I just leave number plates on my bike. Now, how many people go over the Ironworkers Bridge here? Lots of people do it. We used the bridge approaches for a scrambles track when they were first building it. And the government allowed us to do it as long as we took up a collection.
With that film, that line or iron, you know, the approach is where they did it?
Yep.
It's in the same film, including mountain highway and pavement all the way to the top.
And we used to hill climb up Grouse Mountain on the back road. You know, there was a ton of places where we could go and blow off steam, as it were, which you can't do nowadays. And you wonder why they got street racing out there? Because they've just shut down everything. There was a sanctioned racetrack at the foot of Fraser Street where Great Northern Way is. And there's a tree down there. I think it might still be there, Dayton, with a big chip out of the, about 8 or 10 feet up. because Dayton took a trip up that tree on his bike. But there was racetracks everywhere. Where the Dealey motorcycle shop is right now, it was a mud hole. It was called Frog Hollow, and we used to hold mud races. And then when you were finished racing, you go to the GV Clubhouse, which was at First Avenue, and they had a garden hose to hose the mud off you so you can go inside and have a refreshment. So there was little places everywhere where you could go riding. You got lots of use out of your bike. Nowadays, if you want to participate, you pick the sport and you buy a bike to suit the sport. But that would mean owning maybe half a dozen bikes. Nobody could afford that. More questions? Rocky.
I have a little bit of a story that I can tell about one of the trips that some of the Rockets took back in about 1940 or 41.
Do you want to come up here and tell it?
I can do that if you wish.
Oh, of course. I don't like hogging a mic. What do you mean I don't like hogging a microphone?
Okay, thank you. Now, to reiterate a little bit, my father, Ralph Weinstein, he was one of the charter members of the Royal City Rockets. In 1939, Trev Dealey brought 3 BSA Gold Stars in. All 3 of those bikes were bought by members of the same motorcycle club. Now, in 1940 or 1941, they took a trip down to the big motorcycle rally in Longview, Washington, down on Long Beach. And there was Jim Saint and my father would get out on the beach and do basically a drag race start, dig out, whatever you want to call it, down the beach, grab second gear, pull the bike up on one wheel, and see how far they could go side by side, handlebar to handlebar. And Dad's reiteration on all that, some of the stories that he told me, he says you could walk into any bar in a 26-mile stretch of Longview, Washington, and the only thing they were talking about were those 2 guys out on the beach on those limey bikes pulling second gear wheel stands. It must have been quite a show back then, because all the big bikes, there was no such thing as pulling wheelies with them. They didn't have enough power to get the front wheel off the ground.
Too heavy.
They were too heavy, that's right. But yeah, just one of the little stories that they did tell, that my father used to tell me about and whatnot. It was one of the trips that the Rockets took. They were down there. There was more than the 2 of them. I remember that Dad was telling me on the way back, Jim Saint blew the bottom end on his Gold Star just north of, just south of Seattle. And he ran around with his hat picking up all the little pieces so that he could come back home again. And evidently he welded the crankcases back together again and repaired the bike and got it running. So it was quite a story. Anyway, thank you for letting me share that with you.
Now, one of the things you've got to remember, at the time he's talking about, there was a war going on. And you had to repair everything that, if it broke, you had to repair it, because you couldn't buy parts. And half the time, if you could buy them, you couldn't afford them anyways. But Long Beach, what a wonderful place to go. It was 26 miles of beach. And it was an arterial highway. You could drive everything out there. And it was nothing to see a guy going down the beach with the front wheel in the air. You could see him coming, you could hear him coming, and you'd see him disappearing, and he'd still have the front wheel in the air. And because we would all buy our year's supply of Levi's when we were down there, and the Levi's weren't pre-shrunk, so what you had to do was you'd put them on, run out in the surf, soak them, and then lay on the sand and let the sun dry them on you. If you had scars on your legs, you could see them through those Levi's. They were that tight. But everybody did that. And I went down there. One gentleman, his name was Bill Granith, the old gramophone. I went down with him. And he had an old 49 Merc. We made it all the way down, made it all the way back, and he pulled up in front of his house and slammed the door, and the frame broke in the rear, and the back of the car came down over the wheels after driving all that distance. And anybody here that knew Bill, all the local riders, Bill, his nickname was Gramophone, and he was the announcer at a lot of the tracks around too. But he was such a happy-go-lucky type of a guy. Unfortunately, again, no longer with us, but he was also a pioneer, and he's in there with the rest of us. Yep, that's right. So the characters of the world were all around us. What a way to grow up. Or what a way to, I shouldn't use that term, because I don't think any of us ever did grow up. Because right now, my second mode of transportation is a 1930 Model A Ford with a Corvette motor in it. So we're still out there. I'm doing it on 4 wheels again. I found that 2 wheels were too dangerous. Well, actually, my new one's got disc brakes on it. It wasn't like the old one. That didn't stop very well. So again, I'm asking for questions. We have one gentleman here who is actually a military historian who went to Europe and put, I'm going to hazard a guess, 6,000 miles? Ron? 12,000 miles on a vintage Harley, dressed up in a Canadian Army uniform, going all over Europe and basically celebrating the end of the war. Yeah. But he also, getting back into the racing, he was one of the guys that was the instigator to have vintage racing up at O'Keefe Ranch. Am I right? Oh. Well, they told me that you were the guy that started it, so yeah. Don't be afraid to take a little credit. And there's another gentleman sitting next to him, Terry, has a 1925 Paragon that was built at Dealey's on Broadway down by Oak Street. And Terry found it and repaired it. There was an article in the paper on him. So everybody here has a different thing that they do for motorcycling. Some of them are restorers, some of them are racers, some of them just hang out and enjoy themselves. And if you ever get a chance to go out and take in a motorcycle race, do it, because you'll really enjoy it. You'll see things happening. It'll take your breath away. I can remember a young lady racing down at Bellingham. She did a cartwheel in front of the grandstand, and I was down there with a bunch of my riding friends, and we were sitting in the front row. And when they untangled all the bikes, she got up, and when she lifted her helmet off, all this blonde hair come falling out. My friends didn't realize it was a girl. And she ended up being, she's a stunt rider now, but she ended up getting back on the bike, and away they went again. So be prepared to see stuff like that, but they go faster now than we used to. There's no question in my mind. Again, questions?
Yeah, who won the soccer game between the GBMC and the Royal City Rockets at Westwood on the motorcycles?
You'd have to ask Frank Kirby, because I think he was there. Do you remember that, Frank, the soccer match? The GBMC's challenged I can tell you who won the hockey game. They challenged us to a hockey game, and it turned out that they didn't have enough players, so they brought some ringers in. Yeah, motorcycle soccer was fun. And again, can you imagine pushing a soccer ball with your feet and try to control a motorcycle at the same time with somebody charging up behind you trying to knock you off your bike? That was motorcycle soccer. And I think we won that one. I can brag about it. There's no GVMCs here, is there? No, I don't think so. But yeah, we used to do stuff like that, just to have something to do on a Sunday. If there was no... And actually, we got a little bit of royalty here. We got a gentleman here who won a trophy one time for going around the racetrack on the back wheel of his bicycle. Right? Did your dad make you give back the money? It was better than allowance. Yeah, he was a talented bicycle rider too. Now these two gentlemen here have been Canadian champions, as their dad has been too. So the Rockets kind of garnered a lot of the gold that was floating around in those days for trophies. And when I worked at Dealey's, they were cleaning up a bunch of stuff. I rescued a whole bunch of trophies. I filled an SUV from the front seat to the rear window with trophies that they were throwing out. And a lot of them had everybody's name on them, except mine. What do you think, Gordon?
We've done pretty well, Terry.
Okay. I'd like to thank everybody for coming and listening to my droning voice. There's some guys here have had to put up with that for years, and they still come back. Right, Henry? Henry and I ride together, so thank you very much.
Goldie, would you like to make any announcements or anything?
No, tea is served and birthday cake.
That's a good announcement.
Thank you very much for coming. That was very, very interesting.
Thanks again, Terry.
Aren't you supposed to sing before you have the cake? Sing.
Ted?
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear
Edward.
Happy birthday
to
you.
One question I have, were you, Dave Wildman, at the 1952 race with your wife? You were in the pits? Yeah. Okay, so we've got Dave and Pat Wildman and Ted Havens. I beg your pardon? Yeah, well, that's three people taking part, yeah. And Carl Porter couldn't make it tonight. And you almost ran into Pat when you went off the road.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah, it's on film, we have it. Yes?
Was the tech inspection at that race?
I beg your pardon?
How tough was the tech inspection?
I,
How tough was the tech inspection at that race?
apparently none. But it was only one lap. Only one lap. So it's not that great a deal, but it's our local history. And so we'll have to preserve that.
Never to be seen again.
And we want to, find out exactly where the race route was. We're not too sure. Ted certainly went through the cemetery. It went through Ocean Park Cemetery. Around it, yeah.
The problem was the bus schedule.
So I hear, yeah. Yeah.
Is it an annual race or just once ever?
Now, there's a question of whether there was a subsequent race down on the flats, and we've been talking with Carl Porter. He says he won it in Burnaby, south of Marine Drive. We've been trying to get Carl out. And he has all kinds of photographs. He has a little museum at his place. So we want to work on Carl. And he went into the race, into the ditch, same ditch, right after, well, a little bit after Ted did, and Carl did quite a nice wobble and a little more spectacular, I thought. Yeah. No, that's it. It was quite a lot of film that Rocky's dad, Ralph, took, but the story is that it was stored in Surrey and all kinds of moisture, and it wasn't, and the film just came apart in people's hands as they were processing it. I understand.